CLS Talks.
Talk to me. CLS Talks. Talk to me. CLS Talks. Talk to me. CLS Talk to me. Real information. Talk to me. Real education. Talk to me. CLS. Talk to me. They don't talk to me. They look like that morning. They don't talk to me. They back that morning. They don't talk to me. They back that morning. They don't talk to me. They back that morning.
Welcome back to the fourth of our feedback specials on the CLS Talks. Des Carthy, how are you this time?
I'm grand. This is the fourth one, is it?
The fourth one, yeah. And who knows, there may be many, many more.
Hopefully.
So let's get to it.
They're good though, aren't they?
I enjoy them, yeah, and I think they're valuable, and a lot of people are saying that they find them useful and interesting and enjoyable.
So won't get any more.
Hi, first of all, thank you for all you're doing for the people of Ireland and exposing the corrupt judiciary and politicians. My question is, what can I do about paying universal social charge, or USC? My work colleagues and I are working for an Irish company in Belgium. We get to see our families once a month for a weekend, as we don't live in Ireland as such apart from this short spell, and we're not entitled to be tax-free or at the very least USC-free. Also, it's not even categorised in our pay slips since the new year. Thanks, and that's from P.
Jesus.
Yeah, this old chestnut.
Okay, do you want to have a go at this first? Let me think about it.
Okay, well, the universal social charge. A good example, actually, last episode we were talking about dog licences and cat licences and things just being brought in willy-nilly.
Yeah.
This is a great example, and it's one that has got the backs of many people, particularly if employed by the state, this universal social charge, which I can barely pronounce, and most people are loath to pay but feel that they have to. So, working for an Irish company in Belgium, don't live in Ireland, and they're not entitled to be tax-free or at the very least USC-free. It's not even categorised in our payslip since the new year. So the question is, what can I do about paying universal social charge? And it comes back to an issue that we've discussed with regard to income tax, as to whether or not you should pay it or whether you want to pay it, and how do you go about not paying it. So it seems to be an issue between the employer and the employee, to use those terms here. And if it was me, I would weigh up initially, do I want to bring this to light with the employer, and do I potentially want to risk losing the job? Maybe you have a great relationship with the employer and you feel that you can bring it up and have that discussion. Maybe you feel you don't. That's for the individual to decide upon themselves. But if you decide you want to do it, well, then it's an issue of discussing it with the employer and saying, look, I don't want to pay that charge.
Or I'm not paying it. And now let's have the discussion around it. And it really doesn't get any simpler than that. The issue does appear to be between those two, and they have to have that discussion. And if you feel you can have it, well, then go for it. And if it was me, I would feel I'd want to be having that discussion. But it is for the individual to decide. Absolutely. Again, it goes back to, what are the repercussions if you end up in a debate with the employer, let's say, and the employer says, no, you have to pay it. Are you prepared then to go further with it? And then the further might be to write a letter to say, I've never agreed to pay the universal social charge. I'm not paying it anymore. Do not steal it from my wages. And then if they do continue to do that, then it's a matter of they are then stealing from you.
Yeah.
So then how far are you going to push that? Are you going to go to a member of the Garda Síochána? Are you going to push it further and further? So again, the best idea would be to have the discussion first, so as you can get a gauge on how willing the employer might be to participate in not paying it, because the employer then will have to deal with revenue to a certain extent, or whoever the body is for collecting the universal social charge. So there'll be repercussions on the employer if they don't deduct it from your wages. But in some cases, as we are aware of, the employer has not taken the universal social charge, but has paid it themselves out of their own money and has not deducted anything from the employee. So that's unusual. But that was to avoid the employer getting into bother with revenue. So it's your call. It's a tough one. And I myself, I think if I was working for an employer, I'd be sort of like wondering, Jesus, would I be getting into a bit of bother here? Now, I'm not trying to put the frighteners on anyone, but that's what you have to consider. What repercussions potentially could there be? And to that extent then, if you don't have the work, how your family going to react to it? But it sounds like this man or woman are pretty much entrapped in this job, because the way they've worded this, I'm working for an Irish company in Belgium. We see our families once a month. Personally, then it's a terrible situation to be living in, isn't it? To be only able to see your family once a month at the behest of your employer. You know, it's like living in a cage, being let out.
And even the issue then of it not being categorised in the payslip since the new year, if you decide you want to go down the route of challenging this, that's something you could use at that point, but it's not necessarily relevant to your initial decision.
Yeah. The other thing, again, I suppose we're both keen on looking at the semantics, and it says here, are we not entitled, I think that should be, to be tax-free, or at least USC-free. Well, being taxed as an income tax-free is a choice again. But again, are you prepared to have the discussion with the man or working you're working for, or are you prepared, or do you not want to rock the boat? So in my case, I just don't know, because it's been a long time since I've been employed by anybody, so I couldn't validly say what I would do nowadays. I know what I do nowadays, but I can't say retrospectively what I would have done then. I probably would have capitulated like most people. I
couldn't say otherwise in my own case either, and it's the horrible beauty of a system that deducts at source. Yeah. It makes it very, very difficult to extricate yourself because you have all these other considerations.
Absolutely. It's tough. It's tough. Now, we have every empathy for the man or woman involved, but it's a matter of getting down, put on the critical thinking camp, think, is it worth it? Is this going to be worth? There's certain battles in life that are worth having. Is this going to be one of them? It could be a testing ground for something bigger to come. Certainly I would look at it like that, as a testing ground for something else to come, but it might be too much for them to take on as well, to have that battle per se. It's a choice, really.
Well, the next one, Des and Lionel, do you, Des, and or do you, Lionel, I like the way this is written, believe that all laws, codes, statutes apply to me just because I'm physically in Ireland? Thank you, B.
I actually don't know B. So how would I know if they apply to him or her?
It depends. They don't apply to you necessarily because you may be physically in Ireland. It begs the question, what is Ireland? Have you granted any kind of jurisdiction to those that make those laws, codes, statutes to allow them to apply them to you in Ireland? I mean, it really is a question that is quite difficult to answer at this point. It comes back again to jurisdiction. Have you granted jurisdiction? And therefore, do those laws, codes, statutes apply to you? If you have, well then yes they do. If you haven't, well then no they don't. But I don't think just because you physically happen to be on what we call the island of Ireland that they necessarily apply to you, because jurisdiction isn't about where you physically stand as a man or woman. Yeah. It's about something else entirely. It can do, but not necessarily is the case. So I would say they don't necessarily, but they may.
Yeah, I can't disagree with anything you've said there, Lionel. It was brilliant.
Thanks. I've never been called brilliant before.
The first time for everything. I'd add to that, there's a term again, the semantics is believe. Now, this is a hard one, and it's a difficult one. I personally say to people, I don't have any beliefs. Now, it's hard for you to codify that for yourself as well, and I went through a whole routine myself saying, well, actually, what do I believe in? And for somebody to say I don't actually have any beliefs, it's a fair statement to make, but I personally don't have any beliefs, because I tend now to look at things, all things, critically.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid for information to come in, but I don't. Now, beliefs to me, see, are based upon stuff you have no knowledge about. Now, I either have knowledge about something or I haven't got knowledge about it. I'm either ignorant of something or I'm not. It's nothing to do with a belief. Either I know about it or I don't know about it. If somebody says to me, do you believe in God? I don't actually have a belief about God. I just don't know. It's that simple. And I can't have a belief. Well, a belief is founded generally upon having no knowledge, no information, no facts, no truth. So I would say I don't know. It's not that I believe or don't believe. I don't know something or I know something, and that's it. So again, the semantics for me is very important, because I don't allow for myself that term belief to come into anything I would discuss, talk about or write about. I keep the belief thing away. I look at it might sound kind of cold, but it's not. It's actually kind of, to a certain extent, it's a better essence for me to operate from, in terms of I'm keeping those things out there that actually have no foundation.
Well, it gives you a critical worldview, and we discussed in the last episode solipsism and what that means. Yeah. And it means that you're decidedly not being solipsistic in your viewpoint. So you're actually critically looking at the information that you have, and you're applying that then, rather than having blind faith in something and thus believing.
Okay, I wouldn't say then, in contrast as well, I do have prejudices and bias. I have to say that. We all do. But I would try to keep them away from being founded upon a belief system whereby there isn't any facts or information or knowledge. I'd be biased and prejudiced in certain contexts once I've had certain information. I mean, I'm very biased and prejudiced against judges, solicitors, barristers, based upon looking at specific cases, what the information is.
Okay.
So I would develop a prejudice and a bias, and sometimes I'd do it purposely for whatever purpose. Now, the other thing I'd pick up on here is that it's something that you raised, Lionel, as well. We raised it before as well. For example, if you go down to a coffee shop, now I tend to go to have a cup of coffee sometimes, and I'd go into the shop, and there's one around the corner here I use quite frequently. They do really nice coffee, and to be honest with you, they're nice people as well, especially the ladies in there. So I go and get me coffee, and when I walk onto their property to get the coffee, I'm now walking into their jurisdiction. There's an inferred contract there that I walk in there, they see me coming, sometimes they say, how are you, have a chat, and the expectation there is that I will give them something and they'll give me something back. Now, if I walk in there and just take the coffee without giving them something, as in maybe €1 or €2 for it, then I'm actually operating in contempt of their jurisdiction. I'm in their jurisdiction. Okay, so I'm bringing myself, when I'm forming a contract, into their jurisdiction. We form that contract as in we have agreed that I'll give them something, they'll give me something, it's a fair exchange. So you're in their jurisdiction when you're operating that way. Yeah. But it's a fair exchange. It's common. It's a common jurisdiction. So you are always bringing yourself living, unless, as we suggested before, you bring yourself away to the wilderness and you survive off what the wilderness will provide with you. Yeah. But even then, you're prone to the jurisdiction of the wilderness. If you don't provide, take something from the wilderness and turning it into something else, the wilderness will provide you with maybe wood, maybe food. You have to put work into it. So you're in the jurisdiction of the wilderness, and the penalty for not actually engaging properly with the wilderness is death.
And if you go and live in the wilderness, you will probably get swallowed up by some Chinese logging machine, because all our wilderness has been sold off anyway. But that's another issue. I digress.
But the jurisdiction thing, that's we said before that jurisdiction is partly in the mind, but it's partly physical as well. Yeah. So that brings it into context. I mean, we're trying to look at these things in a very simplistic, very easy to digest way. So walking into a shop and buying something, you're bringing yourself into their jurisdiction. You're agreeing tacitly that, you'll give us something, we'll give you something, that's it. Mm-hmm. And if you're not in contempt of that, as in you don't run away without paying per se, then that's grand. Everything will be hunky-dory, and you won't even know you were in the jurisdiction.
And you can stroll into the shop and decide not to engage and stroll straight back out, so you can leave the jurisdiction then if you want as well.
It's a bit like walking into court. You can walk in and walk out. Very often we do that. We go in there and observe. We don't engage with it. Sometimes we have to engage with it, but without conceding too much. When you walk into a shop, you're not throwing your wallet on the counter. You're not saying, actually, you check the money, you take it out. When they say to you, well, that'll be €2 for that cup of coffee, you say, okay, grand, I'll give you the €2. You don't hand them your wallet and say, look, if you sort it out and give me back what you think is right. Right, so that's what people are in danger of doing by going into a court, is they throw everything on the table and don't look at critically what it's all about. They keep it tight. And when you walk into a coffee shop to buy a coffee, you keep it tight. You don't walk in and say, I want a suit, I want coffee, and that's it. You keep it to that.
Now that makes a lot of sense. That's codified it nicely, actually.
Well done, I love that word.
Yeah, you do.
Codified.
Great talks, lads. Keep them coming. I've 2 questions. 1, are the Gardaí's contemporaneous notes as good as evidence in court? And 2, can a judge refuse you a Gary Doyle order? I was in court once for a parking fine under a section of the Road Traffic Act, asked for a Gary Doyle order. The judge refused, saying that was only to be granted in, quote, serious cases. I retorted that this was a criminal case, and he said, again, quote, no, it wasn't. Finally, a talk on the TV licence issue would be great. All the best, PK.
Okay, I think we've covered the TV licence before.
We have now. This obviously came in before that was published.
Right, okay. We know that there have been cases where people have sought Gary Doyle orders and they've been told by the judges, no, you're not getting one. Blatantly. And we have transcripts of all that sort of stuff. Now, the judge was right to a certain extent where he says it's a serious case. Now, the rebuttal to that, and this is where the man on the face of it seems to have not done perhaps the work. Now, I'm not saying he has or hasn't, but on the face of it, it looks like he hasn't done the work. Because if the man had read the DPP guidelines, for prosecutors, section 2010, they'd see there that it tells you what's serious and what's not serious.
Yeah.
It gives you a list of 3 or 4 things. Now, off the top of my head, I can't tell you what it is. We have covered it in the Garda Oil Order book. And it even says in the Garda Oil Order book, when the judge puts it back to you as for serious cases, you have to tell the judge why it's serious. So it's serious because you could end up in prison. It's serious because you could perhaps lose your licence to drive or whatever it is, they codify it as, and or you could end up with a heavy fine that could destroy your life. And obviously prison as well could destroy your life. So is that not serious? So that's the question I'd have for to throw back at the judge. Say, well, is it not serious that I could go to jail? But this lends me to think that the man actually hadn't read the charge in which he was up for to denote exactly what could happen as a penalty. Because I think it's pretty serious if you go in there on a speeding ticket and you could end up in prison.
Which is the case, and let people not be in any doubt about that.
So the argument with the judge, or the question for the judge should be, is it not serious that I could end up in prison? My liberty is at risk. You know, it's not just a serious issue, but it's an issue of human rights, and it's an issue of constitutional rights. Is that not serious, Your Honour? I throw it back to them. Well, how do you not take this stuff seriously? Yeah, it's your court, like you're saying to him. Well, do you not take imprisonment serious? I do. I don't know about you. So that's the argument that had to be had on the day when you're and it tells you this in the DPP guidelines, and it tells you this in the Garda Oil Order book. So it just tells me the man had not prepared sufficiently on the day. Now, not to say he couldn't prepare again and go again, but on the day, that preparation was not done. And I don't know how many countless times I've sat down with people and said, read the DPP guidelines. We say it over and over, and we're talking about the Garda Oil Order in the recent past, and we will be in the future. You need to read this stuff critically. We're not just promoting the book called the Garda Oil Order, we're saying the DPP guidelines, section 8 and section 9, there's only 2 sections you need to put into your brain and have them there. Not just have them in your brain, but have them down in common terms. So that when the judge says to you, well, it's only for serious cases, you can say to the judge, well, it's a chance of me being imprisoned. Is that not serious? My life being destroyed, is that not serious? Do you not take that seriously? Now, the judge isn't going to say, no, I don't. You're just a joke. Yeah? Yeah,
because then he's opened up a whole other Pandora's box.
That's another issue then.
Yeah.
So that argument seriously was not had here. You know, all I retorted, what the man said was, I retorted that this was a criminal case, and he said, no, well, you didn't actually tell the judge anything. He knows it's a criminal case, although he said, no, it wasn't. Well, that's wrong for the judge to do that, okay? That's actually an issue whereby that judgment could be reviewed, appealed, and brought all the way to Europe, where a judge says something like that, and possibly even the judge could be thrown off the bench for saying something like that. He's lied on the face of the court. That's another issue, though. But it got the court past the point where you said, okay, fair enough, you know, walk out. Now, I'm just rereading between the lines because nothing else was said here. Does that make sense?
Oh, that makes sense. And then the issue of the Gardaí's contemporaneous notes as good as evidence in court. Well, to that I would say, well, any evidence that is brought to court is evidence, and the contemporaneous notes are evidence. Now, if you have a problem with what's contained therein, it's up to you to challenge that and to cross-examine the Garda based on what's in those notes. But yeah, anything that the Garda will state, or any statement that he or she makes in court, is evidence, and generally they use their contemporaneous notes then, which is the little black notebook, to give their evidence. So yes, it is as good as evidence in answer to the direct question.
Yeah, the contemporaneous notes are evidence, as you rightly said, Lionel. It's straightforward. Judges will argue that they're not. But the guard is relying upon the contemporaneous notes to be in the stand. The guard cannot rely upon anything else. Now, I just want to make this clear with everybody. The guard can stand there all day long and use his contemporaneous notes as reference points to remind him of what happened. But the guard can't read out verbatim off a book. Just so as everybody's aware of this. So if you catch a guard in the stand reading the legislation or the act or the statute or the charge or whatever, he shouldn't be doing that. He has to have this stuff in his head. He's supposed to have the knowledge up there. And the contemporaneous notes, and the judges will tell you this, they're just to act as a reminder for the guards as to what happened on the events on the day. But you are entitled to have a photocopy of those documents. And if you were seeking a copy of the contemporaneous notes, I'd be looking for the notes before, the day before, perhaps 2 days before, and the notes the day after and the day after, because you want to get them in context. Were these contemporaneous notes written like 6 months later? Were they written on the day in question? Because obviously, if they're written 6 months later, they wouldn't have as much validity. as well.
Yeah.
So you could challenge the validity of what the guard had written down. Had he written it down retrospectively to suit what he was going to say on the day? So again, it's not just the contemporaneous notes. I'll be looking for the notes before and after, and you are entitled to see them because the guard is relying upon them for testimony in the court. They are evidence.
And it can be a good idea as well. They mightn't necessarily adhere to your requests or cede to them, but to actually ask to attest or sign the contemporaneous notes, to have a look at them on the side of the road or wherever that might be. So, okay, guard, I want to see those now, please, and we'll both sign them and attest them. And you can draw a box around them or whatever if he's going to give you the notes, which they generally won't do, but you can use that then to your advantage potentially in any case. And stick a box around it so that you know anything outside those boxes weren't part of his notes on the day.
Yeah. Or take a photograph of it.
Or a photograph, and it can be very, very powerful. It's all about gathering evidence, and he's got to use his evidence, and then if you feel you can counter it, do so.
Okay, the next question is kind of similar to a certain extent. Hi, is there any circumstances, regardless of how minor an alleged criminal offence is, that a judge can legally, lawfully refuse a Gardaí order? Well, in the last question, you know, the man is testament to the fact that a Gardaí order was refused.
Yeah.
They can refuse a Gardaí order. They'll argue that it's not a serious case. And that's their argument. But you have to be able to put it back to them, well, how serious do you take my life? You know.
You see, so much of this comes back to preparation, Des.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just go in with a list of questions. You have to know how those questions are going to be answered, and you can know. And you then have to know how you're going to respond to their responses, and you have to track the case and put yourself in the shoes of the guard or the judge or the solicitor, barrister, whoever it might be. And you need to know going into your case how that case is going to pan out. And people might say, well, how can you know? Well, you can know if you apply the law, if you actually go through, as you said, the DPP guidelines, the laws, the acts, the statutes, the codes. If you know those, you can read them. A guard can't read from the book, but you can, and you can then throw that back at them if they step out of line.
And not forgetting also, Lionel, is the relevant charge and the specific act and code under which they're charging you. So you need to drill down and say, well, what exactly is it they're saying here that they're charging me with? And what is the penalty, the ultimate penalty? That denotes how serious the issue is. And in most cases, where it comes to traffic, speeding, drunk driving, blah, 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 it's a very, very, very serious case. But you need to be able to say that back to the court and say, this is, you know, much more serious you need to take the fact that I could be locked up.
Exactly, it's the outcome or the potential outcome of the case or the ramifications that it holds for you as an individual that decide whether it's serious. Not that we perceive parking in the wrong spot as being serious or otherwise. It's actually the outcome that decides it, as opposed to the initial act.
Very good point. It's the outcome, the result. Okay. We should have said that at the beginning.
We should have really, but we got to it eventually in typical style. So the last one for this episode, and we will have another episode to come next week. My query is about not registering at birth. Can you please advise on how to deal with the hassle that is sure to come from not registering, i.e. getting a passport, etc.? Well, we don't give advice, but we can discuss it. How to deal with the hassle. I mean, there is hassle that's sure to come. A lot of this comes down to personal choice and how much hassle you're prepared to put up with and fight for and fight against and deal with. Because if you register anything, you're essentially, in legal terms, giving up the ownership of, and you become the protector or the keeper or the user of whatever it is. And it comes from, I think we discussed it in the past, the terms regis and ter, from the old French, regis being the king and ter being the land. So you're giving it to the king's land, essentially. So if you register the name, well, that name becomes the property of whoever you register it with, presumably in this case the state, and the state can then claim jurisdiction to give you either the benefits or, well, they're all known as benefits, so that benefit might be, I don't know, the dole somewhere down the line. That benefit might be
bed and breakfast.
Bed and breakfast, exactly, the benefit that none of us want. Or it might be something else, the perceived right to travel by getting a passport or driver's license or whatever it is. So there are ways around it. I'm not going to go into the ways around it because we could be here all month discussing them, but it comes down to
ways around it. It's just basically deciding.
Well, it is deciding, you're absolutely right, because you're not trying to necessarily sidestep or avoid or kind of con the state out of doing anything. You're not doing anything wrong by this, and that quite often that's an example of my conditioning coming to the fore there. Like, we're not trying to con anybody. It's a case of, do you want to go your own way and travel that path, which can be much more difficult to travel, or do you want to take the easier route and register that name and then get the perceived benefits?
Again, I'd be thinking medium to long term, because like with a child, obviously you're going to have them up until they're at least 18, if not 38. So they're going to ultimately, let's just say you decide not to register the birth, then certainly the state will come after you to a certain extent. Now, you may be able to fend that off for a period of time and stop them and all that, and it might stop them completely. But then what's going to happen is, if you want to get your child educated in the state school, that's going to be a problem. If they want or need to travel abroad, and you come to the checkpoint, the passport checkpoint, and they haven't got a passport, then that's going to be now, I'm not saying you can't get past all that and get over that, but it's creating more hassle for you, and that's exactly why the system is there. It wants to create hassle for you to make sure you do these things. So it's going to be a set of battles all the way through, and then you're also taking away, like, you'll be educating the child, obviously, as in, this is why we're doing this is why we didn't register, this is why you haven't got a passport and all the rest of it. Now, again, but does the child want that as well? So it's a very, very difficult one to decide, but it is a decision, knowing that all these things may have to come, as in those little battles, unless the child is going to say, well, I'm never going to leave the island, and you're making that decision for them early on. Equally, having said that, they can go and get them themselves registered after the birth, after they reach the age of maturity. So that can be their choice then, unless they want to continue with the little battles that they may have along the way. So, like, it's Hobson's choice. I don't know what that means too much, but basically, it wouldn't be my inclination. I'd be more inclined to say, oh, damn it, look, it's another battle I don't need to have yet. And that's a battle perhaps my child can have themselves at another stage. I can educate them. But it's choice. You know, again, I wouldn't knock anybody for doing it, and I'm not going to knock anybody for registering their children. I think in recent history, there was issues. Now, it went quiet. I think it was Adele, the singer, didn't register the birth of her child. Now, correct me if I'm wrong on this.
I've no idea.
Maybe Adele hasn't even had a child. I don't know.
No, she has had a child, yeah.
And I think then the state were pursuing her. Now, after that, it died to death. Nothing was heard. I watched out for it, but nothing was ever resurrected.
Okay.
So I'd imagine that she may have said to the state, right, okay, come after me if you want, but I've got more publicity on my side than you have. Or maybe she just simply capitulated and said, okay, I'll register the birth. But it was an interesting one, and it just died away. So I'd be interested in interviewing Adele on that one to see what happened there.
We'll see what we can do in that regard. And then the issue of deregistration. You can deregister something if it's registered. I'm not saying there won't be a battle to do that too, but if you've registered, you can deregister.
Why though? Why deregister something?
Well, if you want to.
If you want to. But again, is it looking for a battle that you don't necessarily have to have?
I think in some cases, yes, and it depends on the case, really, you know. And it comes back to those choices and those decisions that you brought up. What do you want to do with your life? And if you're over 18 and it's, you know, I mean, if there's nobody else responsible for you, you make those choices. But as a parent, you have to make those decisions on behalf of the child. And it's a tricky one, because you might hold your own, to get back to beliefs, which we discussed in the past, you might have your own belief system. And is it right to necessarily put that onto the child? Yeah, they can reject it down the line, but it's a personal decision, really.
All you can do really with your own children is educate them as best you can. I personally wouldn't allow beliefs to come into anything, if at all possible, but it's a mindset that you have to get to. You have to analyse that thing, belief, what is it founded upon. Again, not going back to it too much, because we could be here. It's one of those philosophical debates we could have all day long, and it's been thrown at me so many times, and I end up walking away from the debate or discussion when somebody says you must have beliefs, because they don't get it. If somebody says to me, you must have a belief, and I've been challenged by my own family about this, and I said, well, why would I have a belief in something when I either know something or I don't? And I don't want to get on to it again, but that's all it boils down to, is you either know or you don't know.
And what is a belief? Quite often when you put that question back then to people, they're not even sure.
Well, you can break it down. You can say, well, okay, somebody says, I have a belief in God. Right. Can you prove that? Can you show me? And they say, well, obviously no, because, I can't. Well, therefore, that's a belief, isn't it? Because it's founded upon nothing. You don't have any facts, information. Now, I'm not one of those that would look for somebody to back up in real terms, right, you believe in God. But I'd be quick when somebody says to me, you must have beliefs. I wouldn't challenge somebody else's beliefs in terms of whatever they have, because that's not my business. I don't care too much if they do or don't believe in something. Now, if it gets in the way of us looking at something that they critically need to look at, I'd say, look, you need to set your beliefs aside for
and
the
that's
moment.
Generally what happens. The truth can be obfuscated by belief.
Yeah.
And there's programming and back to schooling and all the issue of so-called education, and
it's quite. I mean, we're used to it, I suppose, Lionel, what we do day to day. But again, I would say that a lot of the people that I speak to on a one-to-one basis, I actually have to tear them down. Because they come in and they say, I assume this, or I believe this, or I believe that, and so no, that's no good to me.
Yeah.
If we want to actually make progress in this, we actually have to find out what's true and what's not true.
Yeah.
What is the truth of something? And it's not easy to get to the truth of anything. It's critical reading, writing, and further thinking about it. It's very difficult to get the truth about anything. And the things that primarily get in the way of getting to the truth of something are presumptions, assumptions, and beliefs.
Yeah.
And once you can move those over for a while, they can take up their beliefs again at another stage, but they won't. You get through to somebody and you get them to sidestep their belief system for a while, they won't readily go back to it.
Well, why would they if they've been looking through fogged up glasses for whatever length of time, and suddenly they wipe those glasses? They didn't realise they could up to then. They wiped those glasses that they could see with crystal clarity. Why would you want to go back to the foggy glasses?
They generally don't. A certain part of them is attracted to going back to having an attachment to a belief or an assumption.
Yeah, because you don't always see what you want to see.
Yeah, correct.
I mean, you might see some horrible stuff through those clear glasses, but there's your red pill, blue pill scenario, to use the Matrix analogy.
We're getting too philosophical.
We are. It's very philosophical. And it's a great way then, I think, to round off this episode. Another one on the way next week, and I'm looking forward to it. Des, thanks a million.
Thanks. I think it's time for a coffee.
In that shop you mentioned earlier?
Absolutely, yeah. I'll go back into their jurisdiction.
CLS